In our last class, we did multi-story memory model where I taught you about the sensory memory, short-term memory and the long-term memory. So today in this session, in this class, we'll be doing about working memory model, and it is important for you to understand that how working memory model is different from multi-store memory model. In multi-store memory model, you had sensory memory, short-term and long-term memory. In that, the procedure is in a very linear method, that when the information comes in, it is very simplistic in nature and it is in a very linear way, that when the information comes in, it gets, it is detected by your sensory memory. It stays there for a while in your sensory memory, like for 1 second or 2 seconds. From sensory memory, it moves on to the STM. From STM, it goes to the LTM. And this is one-way method, one-way direction in which the information is processed and it is stored in the memory. Second thing, what we learnt about in multi-store memory model is that there are separate units, separate storage spaces. Sensory memory, short-term memory and long-term memory. So these are three different boxes, three different memory storages that are there, and this is how the memory moves. Now working memory model is very different from what we learned in the last class. Now there was a lot of criticism in this multi-store memory model, that how can memory move from just one box to the other, one storage to the other. It is too simplistic in nature and it is also too in a linear method. So there are definitely 2 and 4 things that happens in the memory. Today we'll be discussing about that. Working memory was given by Baddley and Hitch in 1974. What exactly is working memory? Working memory means when the information comes to your mind, okay, when it is detected and when it comes to your memory, to your mind, that time it is in working, it is in process, it is functional, it is going on. So what does that mean? For example, memory is not something that information comes and gets stored and it keeps getting passed on. It is there in the memory and it is, being worked upon. For example, you're doing something. For example, let's say you're cooking, you're in the kitchen, and while you're cooking, you see that how, in your memory, in your current working memory, that okay, I've put in salt, I have put in this, now I have to put this. So you can do all this when the information is in your memory and you're working on it at that moment. So small amount of information is being held in your mind and you are holding it in your memory so that you can do the cognitive task. I mean, you cannot keep on forgetting continuously while you are doing the cognitive task. You have to hold the information in your memory so that while you're doing the cognitive task, be it maths problems, be it studying, learning, or doing any kind of cognitive task, when you're doing something, it is important that some information is being held in the memory and you are, while it is you are holding it, you are working on it as well. So that is called a working memory by Baddley and Hitch in 1974. So before we start with what is working memory model, how it works, how it is different from the multi-store memory model, let's understand first, let's familiar with the different terminologies that will be using it again and again. So I already told you what is working memory model and by whom it was given. Now there are other terminologies in it. First is phonological loop. The second is visual spatial sketchpad. Third is episodic buffer. So we'll do one by one and then move ahead with the processing of it. Phonological storage, it is also called as auditory storage or articulatory loop, because it is all related to the sounds. It is all related to your listening. So phonological loop is all the memory, the short-term or storage memory for your listening. So whatever you are hearing, that goes in the phonological loop. Short-term storage for sounds and words, and it retains the information with the help of maintenance rehearsal. This then is visual spatial sketchpad. Anything that you are seeing around yourself, anything that you is in your vision, that comes under the visual spatial. This is a short-term storage memory holder. Visual spatial sketchpad, which is used to hold on to the short-term memory of everything that you see. everything that is in your visual, in your spatial ability, or you are seeing things, that comes under your vision, that comes under this. Then third is the central executive. What is central executive? Central executive is like a supervisor, like a manager that manages and supervises, which information is going where, from there where it will go next. So that works like a central executive, is the manager as a supervisor. It controls the flow of information. It selects the strategies to process information. And from this short-term memory storages, it transfers all the information to the long-term memory. Fourth is the episodic buffer. Episodic buffer is a general storage. Okay, we'll be doing it a little later as well. It is a general storage where all other things comes in. So it is in the middle of these two things. So let's understand now. We are familiar with what is central executive, what is phonological loop, what is visual spatial sketchpad, and what is episodic memory. LTM we all are very well aware of. So this is the diagram here you can see. Now we'll understand that how information comes in and how it works through this memory model. So the first is phonological loop. Like I already told you, phonological loop is everything that is related to sounds and hearing. It is a short-term memory and it holds the information only for 2 seconds. So for whatever you're hearing, the sounds that you're hearing, it is going to be there for 2 seconds. It is further divided into 2 subcategories. One is PAS, primary acoustic store. So first is, what is primary acoustic store? It is the inner ear which just holds on all the voices that have recently come. So whatever recently you hear, it is there in the inner ear by the primary acoustic store. Then that information is further rehearsed and it is maintained. The inner voice, articulatory process is what? It is the inner voice when you are repeating the words to yourself. For example, somebody says that apple is very sweet. So it first goes to the inner ear. It is primary acoustic store. Apple is very sweet. Then you have an inner voice that apple is very sweet. You are maintaining, you're rehearsing that thing, that information, and it is also helps in the speech articulation. So you say that yes, apple is very sweet because you are processing that information. So this articulatory process is related to your speech, and it is also related to your inner voice and rehearsal of what you have recently heard. Then next comes your visual spatial sketchpad. Like I told you before, anything that you are seeing, it is related, it gets stored in your visual spatial sketchpad. It is also further divided into 2 categories. Visual cache, that is VC. So all the colors and the form that you see, those forms and colors, everything comes into this. So you understand, okay, this is a rectangle, this is a cube, this is a sphere, or what are the colors of it. So its shape, its form, its color all get stored in this subcategory of visual spatial sketchpad. Inner scribe is also like rehearsing. So once you see, you start to process that, and then there is a rehearsal going on. Just like inner voice was there in that, here it is inner scribe, where you're rehearsing and where you are understanding the spatial, the distance between the objects, and the rehearsal is also happening. And the transfer of this to the central executive is also happening. So this all is done by inner scribe of visual spatial sketchpad. So it is not like, from sensory memory it is going to STM and then to LTM. The working process of working memory model is little different. It is not one way from sensory to STM to LTM. Not just one way, it can be to and fro. So from central executive, it can go to phonological loop, it can come back, it can go to visual spatial sketchpad, it can come back, and from there it can also go to episodic buffer. So there is a to-fro happening of the direction happening, two-way direction of information processing is going on. So for example, there are a list of words written on the board. For example, it's written apple, onion, or apple is very sweet, onion makes you cry, or things like that. So when you're reading it, when you're reading, let's say from a book, okay, there is a story there. So what you're doing, you are reading, that is visual. But when you are subvocally using it, you are in your mind you're reading it. So that is a voice that is happening. So you're reading apple is sweet, and onion is like this, and the boy went to a farm, and things like that. So you are reading in a book, and you are also rehearsing the same subvocally. The voice is going inside you, the voice is running. So what is happening, that with the visual, the auditory is also happening, that is the inner voice. This means that whatever information is going, it is going through the auditory loop. It is going to the auditory storage. There it is being processed. So it is an auditory thing from where the information is being processed. And from there we keep on rehearsing. So for this inner voice, it keeps on rehearsing the information. So when students are learning, when you are learning psychology, what is happening, you are doing it again and again. You are in your mind, you are speaking. So when in your mind you're speaking, when it is going internally auditory thing, that information after rehearsal from that short-term memory goes to the long-term memory. So what is the key feature of this kind of memory, that when we are doing two tasks at the same time and the modality is same, it is likely to hinder with each other. What does that mean actually? For example, if I am reading psychology and on the other hand I am reading economics, or maybe reading a book or a newspaper. Now this is also reading, this is also reading. I cannot do two tasks at the same time. So I cannot read one thing and the other together and understand both the things. I can do it one by one. Maybe for 5 seconds I'm reading this, then 5 seconds I'm reading this. But two tasks I cannot do it together. Or if you are writing and you also have to watch a movie, you cannot do two things together. So you cannot write while looking at it and then watch a TV as well in front of you. So this is again two visual things happening. So the modality is same here. You are using visual here as well and there as well. So these two tasks are going to hinder with each other. But you can do visual task and hearing task together. Maybe I'm writing and listening to music as well. Or maybe I'm reading and when my mother is talking, I'm listening to her as well. So in this process, what is happening, when I'm only writing, I'm using only visual thing, I'm seeing the scenes, and when my mother is talking to me, I can see the scenes what are happening. At the same time, I'm also able to hear what my mother is speaking. So auditory and visual are happening together. But the moment I'm understanding or learning something, I'm rehearsing something in my mind, maybe let's say it's a definition. So when my mother is speaking, I'm not able to learn the definition. Why? Now you will say that is visually, because it's written there. So why can't I learn a definition? Because when you are reading the definition, you can read, but for rehearsing, you have to use subvocal voice. I just told you 5 minutes back in the session that you have to rehearse it. Internal voices, inner voice is going on. You have to, when you're learning, when you're rehearsing, you subvocally use that, this means this is called this. So it's a biological term, or it's some psychology term that you're learning. So this inner voice is going on. Now when your mother is speaking, that is also a voice, inner voice is also going on. So two things you cannot do together. But yes, you can read or look at the pictures while your mother is speaking, because that is visual as well as auditory. So these two different modalities will not hinder each other and will work simultaneously. But the moment two different tasks are there with the same modality, two listening tasks or two visual tasks, then it is going to hinder with each other. Now we'll be doing some supporting studies where we see that how these two modalities can hinder each other or how they support each other, and how in these studies we'll see supporting studies that how from the central executive, how it is managing, how it is processing between two different modalities. Okay, so this is very important for IB psychology students. I'll be giving you some studies, supporting studies here that you can write in your 9 and your 22 marker questions, and I hope it is helpful to you. And if you are liking this video, please don't forget to subscribe so that you can watch all the IB related concepts here. Okay, now going to the study. The first study is by Landry and Bartling 2011, that was conducted, and who conducted an experiment using articulatory suppression to test the working memory model. Now, the aim was to investigate if articulatory suppression would influence recall of a written list of phonological dissimilar letters in serial recall. So that means articulatory suppression, I already told you that, when you are speaking, so it is related to the voice. Will that influence the recall of a written list of phonological dissimilar letters in serial recall? Okay, so the experiment used independent designs with two groups, a control group that performed no concurrent task while memorizing a list, and an experimental group which performed the concurrent task of articulatory suppression while memorizing a list. The participants were randomly assigned to one of the two conditions. The hypothesis was that the accuracy of serial recall would be higher in the control group compared to the experimental group. The participants consisted of 34 undergraduate psychology students. So the procedure went like this. The participants were tested individually. In the experimental group, participants first saw a list of letters that they had to recall while saying the numbers 1 and 2 at a rate of 2 numbers per second. That is the articulatory suppression task. The control group saw the list of letters but did not engage in an articulatory suppression task. There were 10 lists, each consisting of a series of 7 letters randomly constructed from the letters F, K, L, M, R, X and Q. These letters were chosen because they don't sound similar. The experimenter presented one letter series at a time. The participant received an answer sheet with the 7 blanks in each row before the experiment started. Each participant viewed one practice list in order to become acquainted with the procedure. In the control group, the experimenter showed participants a printed list for 5 seconds, instructed them to wait for another 5 seconds, and then instructed them to write the correct order of the letters on the answer sheet as accurately as possible. This was repeated 10 times. In the experimental group, participants received instructions to repeatedly say the numbers 1 and 2 at a rate of 2 numbers per second from the time of presentation of the list until the time they filled the answer sheet. This was also repeated 10 times. Each trial was scored for accuracy of recall. The trial was scored as correct if the letters were in the correct position. The experimenter then calculated the average percent correct recall for both groups. Now the results were like this. The results showed that the scores from the experimental group were much lower than the scores from the control group. The mean percent of accurate recall in the control group was 76% compared to a mean of 45% in the experimental group. Although difference in the means was large, the standard deviations were nearly identical with ST 0.13 for the control group and ST 0.14 for the experimental group. A t-test was calculated and found a significant difference of p that is less than 0.01. The results supported the experimental hypothesis as the mean percent of accurate recall in the control group was higher than the mean percent of accurate recall in the experimental group, and the t-test showed that the results were significant at p less than 0.01. The data seemed to support the prediction of the working memory model that disruption of the phonological loop through the use of articulatory suppression results in less accurate working memory model. In line with the model's prediction, articulatory suppression is preventing rehearsal in the phonological loop because of overload. This resulted in difficulty in memorizing the letter strings for participants in the experimental conditions, whereas the participants in the control condition did not experience such overload. The experiment is asking participants to remember strings of random letters in order to test a specific part of the working memory, and it can be argued that although this does not resemble a task that you would do in your everyday life, however, it could resemble what is happening during multitasking. For example, when you're trying to study for a psychology test when at the same time talking to a friend on the phone. So I hope you understood this experiment. It clearly supports the working memory model that when the control group was given just one list to learn, so they just learned, and while they are seeing the letters, they are rehearsing in their mind X, L, M, R, Q, W, X, L, M, R, Q, W, and then when they have to write, it is still rehearsing. The voice is going inside them, L, M, X, R, Q, W. So this is what they are writing, right? Now, if you're told to read these letters and keep on saying 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2 while seeing the letters, what is going to happen? It is an overload on your phonological loop. So articulatory suppression is happening. In this scenario, you are doing two tasks, articulatory tasks together. So both the things are auditory, related to auditory. One is rehearsing, one you're speaking in your mind the letters that you're seeing. You are seeing, that is visual, but you're repeating in your mind. The voice is going inside your mind. And you're also speaking 1 2 1 2. So this is also sound, and the inner voice is also sound. So both the sounds are together happening. So it is difficult for us to hold that much of overload in our phonological loop. So that is why the experimental group did not perform as well as control group. I hope this is clear to you. Now let's do the evaluation of the study. It is also very important because in the terminologies, in the command terms like discuss or evaluate so and so study, where you have to evaluate, you will have to say that how the study was, what were the strengths and the weaknesses of the study. So for evaluate and discuss command terms, these can be important. So let's do the evaluation. The evaluation goes like this, that the study is a well-controlled study with a high level of internal validity. A cause and effect relationship can be determined. The nature of the study is rather artificial and thus lacks ecological validity. The study supports the working memory model and is easily replicable. The findings are therefore reliable. But there was a problem of sample bias because all psychology students were used for the study. They are not the representative of the population. Second problem was demand characteristics. The psychology students may have predicted what is the aim of the study and they behaved a certain way to achieve certain results. Third problem was, or weakness we can say, is the cultural biasness. The experiment was done only in USA. The findings may not be applicable to other cultures. That is maybe an emic finding. The second study leads to, that is also a supporting study by Baddley's experiment on working memory. This is a very famous study, must write in your exam. So Baddley et al. 1975 conducted several experiments to test the effect of word length on memory span. Specifically, their aim was to test the limits of the phonological loop to see how much verbal information it could handle at a time. The first experiment went like this, Baddley et al. 1975. The researchers prepared lists of 4 to 8 words, with half of the list using short words and the other half using long words. The lists were presented in ascending order and it was a 1.5 seconds delay between each word. Afterwards, participants were given 15 seconds to recall the words in the order they were presented. This continued until participants failed on all 8 sequences, which was thought to indicate the extent of working memory capacity. This is the graph that you can see. As expected, the researchers found that word length had a significant impact on memory capacity. Participants were able to recall more of the both shorter words and the shorter list. This suggests that all of the inputs were being processed by the phonological loop and that it has certain limits. The researchers varied their procedure for the 7th experiment in the series, testing recall for words that were visually presented while participants either remained silent or as the control condition or counted aloud as the articulation condition. As expected, the silent group recalled more words than those in the articulation condition, presumably because the phonological loop was too busy articulating sounds for counting aloud. So there was limited working memory capacity remaining for the words. Interestingly, the difference in working memory span for long words versus short words disappeared for participants in the articulation condition. The researchers followed up with yet another experiment investigating why the word length effect had disappeared and concluded that it is not because articulation prevented rehearsal of the words, but because articulation prevented encoding of the visual material in a phonemic code. In other words, the words were only processed visually, not phonologically, so there was little to no difference between the short words and the long words as far as the visual spatial sketchpad is concerned. Therefore, the word length effect disappeared, so neither the short nor the long words were more likely to be recalled. So the findings ultimately supports the idea that working memory is modality specific and that the visual and verbal inputs are processed by separate components of working memory. namely the phonological loop versus the visual spatial sketchpad. The researchers had theorized that esteem span is not constant, and although previous theories and research had suggested that esteem capacity was limited to 7 plus minus 2 items, that capacity could not change with a number of factors including word length. Put simply, esteem capacity might be larger for a bundle of short words and smaller for a handful of larger words. More specifically, the researchers researched the following conclusions: that working memory span is inversely related to word length. This suggests that working memory span is limited but not constant. Second, short words are recalled better than long words. So when syllables and phonemes are held constant, this too suggests that working memory has a limited capacity, and this varies from person to person. The word length effect disappears when participants articulate irrelevant sounds, suggesting that working memory is modality specific and that irrelevant articulation prevents phonological encoding of visual materials. Think about it this way: there is a good reason why students should not whisper to each other during teacher presentations. Baddeley et al. 1975 shows very clearly how interfering inputs can limit working memory capacity. It is not limitless. More theoretically, the researchers interpreted their results as indicating that phonological loop had a limited capacity and that it works as some kind of output buffer for speech production. In other words, the phonological loop can only hold so much, and verbal memories and so on are held there until the individual is ready to talk. The point is that whole notion of interfering input fits with the working memory model, since there are only so many tasks as individual can manage at the time in working memory. You can see here the dual task experiments and working memory. First task is what? Listening to something, and the second task is again it's a shape that you can see. So small, medium, and high or large is the amount, the intensity of the task. So dual task procedures require participants to perform two cognitive activities at the same time. So Baddley and Lieberman had participants either visual numbers or memorize a sequence of nonsense words, and then introduced a secondary task asking participants to either respond to changing brightness levels on a computer screen, that is visual processing, or to point a flashlight of a metronome while blindfolded, which was meant to tax spatial processing. Now they discovered that the primary visual task was impacted by visual interference, brightness on a computer, but not by spatial interference, that is flashlight and metronome, which led the researchers to conclude working memory had distinct visual and spatial components within the visual spatial sketchpad. So the dual task paradigm has had a major impact on the development of working memory as a theory. I hope that you understood this about the working of two modalities at the same time and how it interferes with each other or does not, depending upon which modality are we using at that moment. So these were the two studies that we did. Now we will be doing the third study, supporting study by Warrington and Chalice. So the Warrington and Chalice 1970 study, the aim of the study was to investigate the impact of brain damage on short-term memory. The procedure was a series of tests were conducted on patient KF who had suffered from brain damage due to a motorcycle accident. He was presented with the information orally and then visually, which he had to recall. The findings were like this: patient KF was able to remember visual information much better than verbal. He could still transfer information from short-term storage to long-term storage. The conclusion is that this supports the working memory model because it shows there are different stores for different kind of information. Patient KF could recognize visual and auditory information, that is telephone ringing, but not verbal. Thus, there must be different components for information. So the evaluation of the study goes like this, that it was a case study. Since the research method was used as a case study, it is difficult to generalize the findings. This is because only one patient was used and he may have been exhibiting emic behavior. It was a longitudinal study, so that is a strength of the study. A case study was longitudinal, allowing the researchers to be more precise in their investigation and findings. Longitudinal studies also allowed the researchers to find patterns over time in the patient's memory. Researcher biasness. The researchers developed a relationship with KF due to the study being longitudinal. This may have influenced the results and gotten too involved because they had become emotionally attached. Then there were ethical considerations as well. Since patient KF suffered from brain damage, it is difficult to know how well informed he was about this study. Patient KF may not have completely understood what he was getting into. This is important because we can't be sure if gave consent to the experiment or not. Let's do the evaluation of the theory now. We are done with 3 supporting studies, and I hope that you have understood. Now coming to the evaluation, central executive, we don't know how it works or what it does, so there is a lot of vagueness there, and it also controls focus of control rather a memory store. Now talking about phonological loop, biological reflection, PET scans show different brain areas activated while visual and verbal tasks. About phonological loop, strongly associated with the evolution of complex language abilities. About talking about visual spatial abilities, biological reflection, PET scan, visual tasks from left hemisphere and spatial information from right hemisphere. Visual spatial studies tasks are artificial and lacks mundane realism. So basically, working memory model STM, not just storage but attention, reasoning, reading, comprehension and problem solving. WMM also says that it does not give info on SM and LTM. So there is no information on sensory memory and long-term memory. It is majorly focused only on the STM. WMM also is not a separate model or alternative to MSM, but it is an extension because it is majorly telling you about the short-term memory only. And working memory model, inability to explain accelerations in processing abilities that occur with practice or over time. Episodic buffer, not clear how it combines information together from the whole model and LTM. So the evaluation of the theory goes like this. The strengths are that some aspects are testable. For instance, dual task techniques can be used to test working memory model. There is a lot of empirical evidence for WMM through experiments and case studies like Landry and Bartling, Warrington and Chalice, patient KF who suffered from brain damage. Furthermore, brain scans have shown that different parts of the brain are activated by different tasks. This supports WMM because the model suggests different types of information are held in different stores. It is applicable to patients who have suffered from brain damage. It explains why we can multitask. It also relates to specific tasks in our everyday lives, for example, reading, phonological group, problem solving, central executive. But the limitations are that the variables are not clearly defined. Because we can't measure each component separately, it's difficult to measure the role of the central executive separately from the other parts of the model. The model only applies to short-term memory. It doesn't explain long-term memory. Memory distortion, low emotion has an impact on memory. So that is all about working memory model. I hope you understood that how it works and how it is different from the multi-store memory model. Multi-store memory model was a larger one with all the STM, SM, LTM and how it gets processed. Working memory model does not talk about sensory memory, it does not talk about long-term memory. It is an extension. It is not replacing the multi-store memory model. It is an extension of only STM. So how STM further is works, we only studied about STM very slightly in working multi-store memory model. But in working memory model right now we have studied that how STM actually has different storages and how those different modalities work all together. What are the limitations and evaluation of the study? So we are done with this and I hope you liked my video. Please do subscribe and keep watching the videos from Sonia Psychology classes.